We're going to talk about Samuel. First part, Samuel will be the last judge that we speak about. Of course, after Samuel, we have King Saul. So Samuel is the last of the judges. But of course, we can't go into the lesson without talking about the meaning of the name. We have to consider the meaning of the name of the individual before we can move on into a discussion of his life. Samuel means God has heard or God listened. When we think about the prayer that his mother Hannah prayed, this name makes a lot of sense because his mother cried out in her barren state to God for a son, and he heard her cry and supplied the desire of her heart, just like Savannah was talking about. He supplied his daughter's desire by giving her a son. David tells us in Psalm 37:4, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart." Now, in the world we live in, we all know that many have twisted this verse to mean that God will just give us whatever we ask for. Whatever it is that you want. You just, some say, blab it and grab it. It's yours. You just say the word, and God will give you what you ask for. Now, I'm sorry to say, but this line of thinking sets up the soul for disappointment. Now, how many in here have asked God for something that they didn't get? I ought to see every hand up in here because I know that everybody's asked God for something and not got it. Well, we have to understand that God knows better than us. But if we truly delight ourselves in the Lord, the desires of our hearts will only be those things that are pleasing to Him. They will be spiritually beneficial to us as well as to our ministry. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to have a license in our pocket to have a ministry. If we're called out of sin, if we're called to salvation, we're called to be ministers of the gospel. God does hear our cries as well. Often, we can have a better understanding of the source of our own desires by whether we receive them or not. If we're praying and not receiving, chances are good that God knows that what we're asking for is not going to be beneficial to us. Although He may sometimes give us what we want, only so that we can see that the having of it will not bring joy, but rather despair. Once again, I think I've heard this somewhere else this morning. But if our delight is truly in the Lord, if our desire is truly to please Him and seek His will in our lives, we will get everything that we want. And the things that we want will only increase our joy and trust in Him for all things, because the things that we want when we truly put our trust in Him are only going to be the things that bring glory to His name, are only going to be the things that truly benefit us spiritually. There are things that each of us would like to have in this life that will not benefit us spiritually. I know that Wendy and I have talked about, well, if we had money, we could do this or that or the other. Well, if God saw fit for us to have that money, we would do that. But God hasn't seen fit for a reason. Because He knows that even though these may be our intents, the intents and thoughts of our head, He knows exactly what would happen if we had those finances. I don't want anything in this world to hinder me from my service to the Lord. And if having lots of money is going to hinder me from my service to the Lord, I don't want to dream about the things that I could do for God if I had it, because I know that that's not going to benefit me. The Lord, if receiving money, if having lots of money is going to draw me away from the Lord, I don't want money. I've been satisfied for the last 45, 6 years now to have enough to live on. I've never gone hungry. I've never had to go without clothing. I've never been without a roof over my head, unless it was by choice. Everything I've needed has been supplied for me. I've never been wealthy. I've never had money coming out of my ears like some people have. But everything I need has been supplied. Everything to keep me where I need to have my focus has been supplied. I think it's in the Proverbs that says, neither give me wealth nor poverty. Give me enough to live on. I can't quote it precisely, but that's the thought. And that's my prayer. Lord, don't give me any more than I need, but don't give me any less than I need either. Don't give me so much that I get a big head and think I'm better than everybody else. And don't refrain from giving me enough where I feel like I have to steal to survive. Just give me what I need to get me through each day. And He's been faithful to do it. He will always be faithful to give us what we need. And if we're crying out to God and we're not getting what we're asking for, we need to understand the motivation behind our asking. If we're asking and not receiving, we're probably not asking in God's will. God does know better. He knows what we need. He knows the outcome of the choices that we are likely to make. And He does all within His power to lead us and guide us in a good way as a good Father. He's the best Father. We know that if we had good fathers here on earth, the discipline, the correction, the guidance we received from them was for our good. I think the Bible says no discipline at the time seems pleasant, but it's for our good. We can look back on those things and we can understand it was for our benefit. Once again, if we had a good father and not an abusive father, not a father who just ignored us and let us do whatever we want. But if we had good fathers, then we can see that correlation between God, our Heavenly Father, and our individual fathers in this life. We also have the benefit because not all of us had good fathers. And it wasn't always necessarily their fault. My father, I looked at him as a disappearing father. He was never there when I needed him. But now I look back and I see that it wasn't my father's fault. It wasn't my father who ran out on me. It was my mom who chased him out. But growing up, I didn't see that. I didn't understand the situation for what it was. And so when I came to know the Lord, it was very difficult for me to trust the Lord. Because what I saw in a father, I projected onto my Heavenly Father. And I said, He's never going to be there when I need Him. But through the years, God has shown me that He's not like my earthly father. He's different. He's what my father should have been. He will be there for me when I need Him. He's never failed to supply for a single need that I've had. He's given me everything that I needed. Let me get into the lesson here a little bit. The previous lesson addressed some of Samuel's background and early history, including his mother's prayer for a son to dedicate to the Lord, and also his training with Eli. Today, we will look briefly at his early years, but will focus mainly on his later life. Samuel is mentioned in various books of the Bible, but most of his history is found in 1 Samuel chapters 1 through chapter 25, verse 1. Some historians believe Samuel to have written the majority of the book of 1 Samuel. The Golden Truth, 1 Samuel 7 and 15, and Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. Now, looking up the word Samuel, because once again, I can't help but do that when I study the Bible. I love the meanings of names. Another meaning of one of the root words from Samuel that make up the name Samuel is to judge. That part where it's here, God has heard is his name. That heard part, it also applies to as a judge hears a case. So it's speaking of judgment. So Samuel's name could also mean God's judge or the judgment of God. This definition also suits Samuel, since his work as a judge was faithful to God at all times. He may not have been a perfect father, but he was a very good judge in the eyes of the Lord. When the people called for a king, Samuel asked them if he had ever acted improperly or used his position as leverage to get his own way. The people said that he had been faithful in all things and had never failed to provide godly leadership. Samuel was the man God called, and he was faithful in his duties to God. It says that Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he judged faithfully. He didn't just judge as some of the judges judged, just because they had to, because they were placed in a difficult position. But it was his desire to please the Lord. It was his desire to seek God's will and do whatever it is that God would have him to, even when it was difficult for him. Think about, once again, going back to when he anointed Saul to be king. It was not Samuel's desire to anoint Saul to be king. He was feeling very rejected by the people. But God made it clear to him, they've not rejected you, but they've rejected me from ruling over them. That's what God told Samuel. And so many times we have to recognize that in our own lives. If we're to be faithful ministers of the gospel, we have to understand that not everybody's going to listen to what we have to say. Not everybody's going to be open to receive the words of life. But what we need to understand in that is they're not rejecting us. One of the biggest fears that people in general have is the fear of rejection. But the fact of the matter is, if we try to approach someone with the gospel and they refuse to receive it, they're not rejecting us. They're rejecting God. And when we recognize that, we'll have our hearts will be enlarged as a desire to see the souls saved, because we'll recognize this isn't about me. This isn't about me as a minister of the gospel. This is about God and His will through me, and my desire to do whatever it takes to please Him. Because I've seen the way He's treated me. I've seen the way God has given me what I need. Once again, not always what I want, but always what I need. He's given me the guidance. He's given me the direction. He's given me the understanding of His Word that I need to draw closer to Him. And it's His desire that I share that with others so that they can have the same benefit of our Heavenly Father that I have. So when we take the Word out to this world and they refuse to hear it, their rejection shouldn't cause us to say, oh, I guess I'm not a good minister. It should encourage us to seek more of the Lord in our own lives so that we can have more of Him to share with others. Lesson exposition, Samuel the son, part 1. First Samuel 1, 24 through 28. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her and with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. Now I have to point out here, just as a side note, during this time, the weaning of a child could have been as late as 5 years of age. This may sound strange to us, but this was common and perfectly normal for the time. As a matter of fact, in my study, in my looking up, trying to figure out what was normal, I found that today, right now, the world average for weaning a child, anyone want to venture a guess? Anybody?
6 months.
Anybody else?
6 years.
4 years. 4 years old is the world average right now for weaning a child. We, in the United States, seem to be the ones who are doing things differently than everybody else. Good or bad, in this particular instance, we are not lining up with the norm. Even for Bible times, we're not lining up with the norm. But, just a side note, just let everybody know this was not a 6-month-old baby that was brought and left at the temple. This was a young child, probably capable of walking and talking and getting around by himself. At verse 25, and they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord. As thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. Excuse me. And he worshiped the Lord there. 1 Samuel 2, 18 through 21. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it to him from year to year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife, and said, The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went into their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Samuel's life, his existence, the fact that he came into this world was the result of fervent prayer. He was raised totally to serve the Lord. His parents showed him what was important by giving him over to the service of God early in his life. Now, many parents today will dedicate their children to the Lord, and by that single act, far too many believe that their children will always be kept safe. I dedicated them to the Lord. I brought them to church, and I handed them over to the pastor, and I dedicated them to the Lord. Why aren't they doing what I told them to? Have you kept them in church since then? Have they seen the church since then? Child dedication is more than just a single church service on a particular day. That service is simply the start of a family whose lives are focused on God. From that day forward, those parents must live out the example that they wish their children to fulfill. But if they don't, those children will fulfill the example of their parents, whether their example was good or bad. If the parents' lives are not fully dedicated to the Lord, then the lax attitude toward the service of God will be instilled in those children. Such parents have no right to lash out and be angry at God, although they often do, when their children begin to rebel. Child dedication is more than saying, okay, God, here's my child. Now you take care of him because I can't be bothered to be a good example myself. I don't have the time. I don't have the patience. I'm just going to dedicate him to you and you take care of him. That's not child dedication. Child dedication is a public declaration by the parents that they will raise their child to understand the importance of his faithful and continuing service to God. Any failure is not God's responsibility, but the parents. In the situation with Hannah and Samuel, we see an extreme representation of Hannah's desire to see her child be a faithful servant of God. She left her child in the care of the one who would be best able to guide her son into a perfect walk with the Lord. Now, whether she knew about Eli and his sons or not, beside the point. Her desire was not to seek out corruption. Her desire was to seek out God's will. And when she prayed, she said, Lord, if you give me a son, I'll give him back to you. She didn't say, I'll give him to Eli, the corrupt priest. He didn't say, I'll give him to Eli and maybe he can do a better job with my child than he did with his own sons. He said, Lord, I give this child to you. And the only way she was able to do that was to hand him over to Eli. Now Hannah, Samuel's mother, made a vow to God, and though surely difficult, his parents followed through and entrusted the life and training of their young son to the care of Eli. Note the similarities of growth between Samuel and Jesus. And the child Samuel grew on and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men, 1 Samuel 2:26. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, Luke 2:52. As mentioned in a previous lesson, though Eli failed to discipline his own sons, he served faithfully as a mentor for Samuel, training him fully in the ways of God. In fact, when God called Samuel, Eli was instrumental in the young boy recognizing the Lord's voice. Because the word of the Lord was precious in those days, there was no open vision. In those days, The word of God was rarely heard, since even Eli's sons, priests, had given in to sin. Also consider this. Eli had failed to raise his sons in the proper nurture and admonition of the Lord as the Bible instructs. This became an opportunity for Eli to help restore the priesthood after poor conduct in raising his own sons. This gave him a way to redeem himself and his failure as a father, even though he had failed miserably in the instructing of his sons in the proper way of the priesthood. In Samuel, we have an example of God's mercy on his people. God knew all that would take place and filled Hannah's heart with a desire to put her son in the hands of this priest of God. Now, if she had just kept Samuel to herself, what would have happened to Israel? We see as Eli was getting ready to pass off the scene, we see that he was old and fat and blind and for age, and his sons were wicked. What would have happened if Samuel hadn't been brought to Eli? Who would have taken up the priesthood when Eli passed away? His wicked sons. And how far astray would those wicked now priests, how far would they have led the children of Israel astray in their service to the Lord? Away from the service to the Lord, I guess I should say. God's providence is greater than our failure. When I look at my own life, I see my failures. God provided beyond what I deserved. He provided a way of escape for each and every one of us. In this instance, He provided a way of escape for His people by providing them with a faithful minister. In our lives, He provided us a way of escape by sending His own Son to the cross so that we could have the hope of forgiveness, so we could have the hope of redemption in our own lives. The family of Eli was lost as a result of sin, but God caused His truth to move forward as a result of Eli's faithfulness to impart the importance of God's service to this adopted son. Romans 8:28, probably everybody can quote it. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. No matter how hard the trial, if we keep our eyes on God and refuse to allow our circumstances to steal our vision, God will be glorified in the end, and we will be blessed as well. We have to understand every trial that we face, every difficulty that we go through is not a result of our own sins. Sometimes the trials that we face are simply to cause us to look more firmly toward God. Sometimes the difficulties that we face are just to take our eyes off of the situation. And when God began to carry out judgment upon Eli's house, Samuel had already received years of needful instruction to fulfill his God-called ministry. Where Eli had a twofold responsibility in his work for God, Samuel would have a threefold responsibility of high priest, judge, and prophet. And in these three, he was faithful. He did what God had called him to do. He was the high priest, the judge, and the prophet whom God had called him to be. He did the work set aside for him. So God could say, "Well done," to Samuel, because he had done well. Part 2, Samuel the judge, 1 Samuel 5, 2 through 4. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon, and they set it by Dagon. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early on the morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. 1 Samuel 7 and 3 and 15 through 17. And Samuel spake unto all the house of Israel, saying, If ye do return unto the Lord with all your hearts, then put away all the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. And he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. And his return was to Ramah, for there was his house, and there he judged Israel, and there he built an altar unto the Lord. The consequences of the disobedience of Eli's sons continued long after their death. The Philistines, having stolen the Ark of the Covenant, set it beside Dagon, their false god. Soon they realized that trouble would plague them as long as they had possession of the sacred Ark. They first attempted to move it from place to place throughout their land. But everywhere the Ark went, the Philistines had difficulties. After 7 months, they grew weary of the consequences, and the Ark of God was sent back to Israel. Now, they didn't simply grow weary of the consequences. After seeing the difficulties and great discomfort as the Ark of God remained in their cities, when the people of Ekron heard that it was coming their way, they cried out, saying that their own people were sending the God of the Israelites to them in order to destroy them. The Philistines had experienced enough to know that this God was far more powerful than the God they served. And it says also that the Ark of God was sent back to Israel. Well, the Ark was sent away. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was sent back to Israel, and I think some thought that the Philistines, some of them thought that the troubles that they were facing were simply coincidence. Others believed that the God of the Israelites was causing all of the difficulties. Well, in order for them to determine where the source of their troubles were, they worked out a plan. They had 2 cows that had recently been given birth were separated from their calves. These were the animals that they used to pull the cart that had the ark in it. Now, I don't know if anybody knows anything about cows in here, anything about cattle, but anybody who knows anything knows that a cow will not intentionally separate herself from her calf. Now, I remember when Wendy and I were somewhere. I think it was Brother and Sister Walter's house. It's been years ago. I didn't know a lot about cows. I wasn't raised around cows, but they had just their landlords had cows, and their cows had just had calves, and those calves had just been sold that day. And those cows were still there, but the calves were gone. And the entire time we were there, those cows just crying. Where's my baby? Where's my baby? They're crying out for their children. They didn't know where they were. But these, rather than returning for their calves, who would have been crying out to them, they went the other direction, toward the country of the Israelites. The calves were taken back home. The calves would have been crying just like the mamas. The mamas would have been looking for those babies. But instead of looking for those babies, they turned around and went the other way, because God was leading their steps. God was leading their steps to show the Philistines who He was. This was the God of the Israelites who had brought this trouble upon them. This was a far more powerful God than anything they could ever imagine serving. The way the Philistines dealt with the ark proved to them that it was, without a doubt, the God of the Israelites who had plagued them and their false gods. Upon the ark's arrival in the land of Israel, there was a demonstration of the power and judgment of God upon the men of Bethshemesh as they disobediently looked inside. The ark had not been so long gone from Israel's midst that the people could have forgotten the required treatment of it. Over 50,000 Israelites died as a result of their disregard for God's commands. The ark remained for 20 years in the house of Abinadab, while Israel lamented. This seems to have been an opportunity used by the Lord to establish Samuel's judgeship over Israel. We see in 1 Samuel 7:3 that the spiritual knowledge or light was once again being administered through the prophet Samuel. As some of the other judges before him, Samuel judged Israel and called them to repentance for their disobedience to the Lord, helping bring about revival in the nation. They put away their idols, fasted, and prayed, and acknowledged their wrongdoing. Consequently, we see that Samuel spent much of his time traveling throughout Israel in his role as judge. A new day of spiritual knowledge was dawning in what had been a dark land. Part 3, Samuel the priest. 1 Samuel 2:35, I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in mine mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. 1 Samuel 10:1, then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? Now, when the Israelites cried out for a king, we have a perfect example of God giving the people what they asked for, knowing that it would not benefit them. As a result of Israel's failure to recognize God as their king, many generations suffered under the hands of ungodly rulers. Romans 15:4, for whatsoever were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. We would all, each and every one of us, would do well to take note and not continually cry out to God when we don't get our own way. Eventually, we may just get what we ask for, and we may be very sorry that we did once it's in our hands, and we can't get rid of it. We can't separate ourselves from it. Let us all be sensitive to the Spirit of God as He directs us. We'll all be much happier if we do. Things will be so much better. And there are things that we may not enjoy in this life, but as a result of them, we're drawn closer to the Lord. As a result of them, souls are saved. There are difficult things that each and every one of us have to face, but if we'll make the most of every situation, God can use it for His glory. God can use those things for our benefit. We just have to be open to receive it. 1 Samuel 15:22 and 23, and Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, He hath also rejected thee from being king. As high priest, Samuel was sent to anoint Saul when the people rejected theocratic government and demanded an earthly king for the nation. Though reluctant at first to be made king over a period of time, Saul became proud, self-sufficient, and impatient, even offering a sacrifice which was Samuel's role as priest. At this point, we see Saul moving past impatience into rebellion and stubbornness, willfully disobeying the command of God to destroy Agag and the Amalekites, thus bringing an end to Saul's kingdom. Now, I do feel it necessary to point out here about 1 Samuel 15:23. I'm going to read that again, at least first part of it. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry. Now, if anyone has an actual paper Bible in your hands, if you look at the words in this particular passage where it says, as is, those words are in italics. So when it says rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry, the fact that those words are in italics points out that they were not in the original text, but were added by the translators and not a part of the original language. When we read it that way, the truth is much more clear. It is not that these things were similar according to God, they are the same. Rebellion is exactly the same as witchcraft, and stubbornness is exactly the same as iniquity and idolatry in the eyes of God. Others may look on and not have so harsh a judgment, But we were not placed on the earth to please one another, but to please God. If we fall short, it will cost our individual eternal joy. I know that I've been both stubborn and rebellious. I also know that nothing I received as a result of these things, these attitudes, has ever benefited me, not even in this life. My rebellion, my stubbornness has never benefited me. Not in this life, not in the life to come. How much less pleasant will their eternal results be if we allow these things to lead and guide us? Though it would be many years before David, a man after God's own heart, would sit in Saul's stead on the throne of Israel, Samuel was soon sent to anoint the shepherd boy in the privacy of the home of David's father in Bethlehem. Now, once again, what was the difference between David and Saul? David was rebellious. David was a murderer and an adulterer and all sorts of other horrible things. But what was the difference between David and Saul? Saul sinned presumptuously and was unwilling to accept the blame. Anytime, speaking of Samuel here, anytime Samuel pointed out Saul's sins, Saul said, well, the people made me do it. Well, it wasn't me. It wasn't me, it was them. But we see of David, when his sins were pointed out, I believe the Bible says that on several occasions his heart smote him. He recognized his own failures. That's the difference between David and Saul. Saul never understood that he'd ever done anything wrong. He couldn't understand why Samuel was being so harsh on him, because he did everything God told him to do. David, on the other hand, when his sins were pointed out, repented. He turned from them and went the other way. That's what made David a man after God's own heart, not the fact that he was perfect, never sinned. Just one of the many tragedies from the kingship of Saul is how his failures affected his family. As with Eli's situation, this is a reminder that our actions not only impact us, but the next generation as well. Thus proving that no one can sin unto himself alone. So many times I'm sure we've all heard people say, my behavior affects none but myself, so I'm justified by my actions. But life is clear and that it teaches a different lesson. Nothing can be said or done without having an effect on those around that individual. The Word of God proves this point time after time. And if that were not enough, life itself, God allows in our own lives to go to great lengths to prove this fact to unwary souls. If we simply open our eyes, we can see it as well. Still, many refuse to believe that spiritually speaking, and they blindly stumble through life. They trip and fall and knock others over in their haste to prove how well they can see. This is pretty much what happened with Jesus. He said, if you would accept the fact that you are blind, you would have no sin. But that now you say that you see, your sin remaineth in you. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they couldn't see where they were coming short of the law of God because they were fulfilling the Word of God, but they were not fulfilling the Spirit. The letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. They were refusing to do those things in the manner that God had instructed. One of the things that I've often thought about is how so many times the Israelites rejected the Word of God by their own behavior. They would fail to see the importance. I love what Jesus did with the woman caught in the act of adultery. She was guilty. There was no doubt. And according to the law, she should die. But the fact of the matter is, Who among them, who had the rocks in their hands getting ready to kill her, wasn't worthy of the same death? Who of us is not worthy of the same death of the sinners that are walking on the streets today? But God had mercy on us. And He desires that we have the same mercy on others that He had on us. None of us were born perfect. None of us were born without sin. And as a result, He desires for us to have the same mercy on others that He had on us. Revelation 3:17 and 18, because thou sayest, I am rich, and increase with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched, and miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear. And anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. God was pointing out to this church that they'd lost sight of what was important. They missed out. We can't allow that to happen to us. We have to understand the will of God for ourselves and surrender ourselves to Him and His will in all things, so that we can be the faithful ministers, not only for our own sakes, but so that we can be the examples to those around us. Some of looking around, some are retired, some are still working, some are doing other things. But in each of our lives, there are people who cross our paths who need a godly example. Samuel needed a godly example. Eli was the man. He fulfilled his role, if not as a father to his own children, he fulfilled his role in leading and guiding Samuel to be the man that he needed to be, to lead Israel in the direction that they needed to go. As we focus on Samuel's life, it is important not to overlook the role of his mother. Consider the following in relation to this. Hannah prayed earnestly for God to give her a son whom she could dedicate back to Him. She had only a few interrupted years with him before he went basically into full-time ministry. Her ultimate goal was for her child to serve God, even if it meant that she had to relinquish him. I think I'll just turn it over right there. I don't want to try to finish this up and go over.